Ladies and gentlemen, seekers of light and secret knowledge wherever you may be, you are listening to Points of Light Radio, the podcast dedicated to taking you past the apron and behind the closed doors of lodges everywhere. And here is your host, Stan Miller.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Ad Nastana. It's a pleasure to be back with you here on Points of Light Radio. And continuing this wonderful journey that we began over 2 years ago now. Now, if you recall at the beginning of this year, I told you I wanted to cover more of the history of this wonderful thing we call fraternalism. And in today's segment of Points of Light Radio, we are going to be delving into the history of two defunct fraternal orders that left their mark on society in one way or another. The first is the Ancient Order of Gleaners, and the second is the Order of the Heptasophs, right? Like I said, these organizations, they really, you'll see as we go along here, they left their mark. They faded out quickly, but definitely left their mark. So let's go forward and take a look at their history. But as I always ask you, are you still thirsty for knowledge? Are you still searching for the light? Then you just trim your lamp and follow me. The first organization I'll be shedding light on is the Ancient Order of Gleaners, or as they are known today, Gleaner Life Insurance Society. I was not able to get them on to appear on this podcast, so we're just going to cover their history. Now, the Ancient Order of the Gleaners was formed in 1894 in Cairo, Michigan, by Grant Slocum. And as you'll see as we go along, they practice some very elaborate rituals. The Ancient Order of Gleaners was founded in 1894 in Cairo, Michigan, as a fraternal insurance society. Both men and women were admitted. The requirement was that one had to be of good moral character. You also had to provide satisfactory evidence of insurability. One also had to believe in the existence of a supreme being and creator and preserver of the universe. When the order was first organized, it admitted only people who were actively engaged in farming, gardening, and related occupations, as well as people from small towns of up to 3,000 residents. They later dropped the requirement for people from small towns, farming, gardening, and related occupations, and admitted people of good moral character who believed in the supreme being and provided satisfactory evidence of insurability. So all that small town stuff, that was dropped, right? Now, as I said, the Gleaners were at their inception, were a society, a fraternal society that was incorporated under Act Number 119. This was a law regulating insurance passed by the state of Michigan that year. The Gleaners took their name from the biblical book of Ruth. And if you've ever read the story of Ruth, she was a gleaner a gleaner was a person who traveled behind those who were cultivating, and anything they missed, the gleaners could pick it up. That's one of basically the way I read that book of Ruth. Now, as I said, the Gleaners were at first militantly committed to the values of rural and small town America. There were three classes of membership: beneficiary, junior, and cooperative. The juniors could graduate automatically to beneficiary membership by staying in the organization for a certain period. Cooperative membership was a social membership without financial benefits, but with fraternal participation. There's all these little caveats here. Are you noticing that? Members were voted on by the blackball ballot, with 2 blackballs sufficient for rejection. Blackballing. Does that sound familiar? Right. Now, although they were always seen as a beneficiary society, they also followed degrees: the introductory, adoption, Ruth, and dramatic. In the introduction degree, this was required of all new members. After a brief instruction, the candidate would take up an obligation promising to obey the society, be faithful to the society's principle, and not bring harm to any members. The adoption degree consisted of lectures pertaining to the society's basic principles. A good portion of the degree's moral instruction is drawn from the biblical story of Naomi, Ruth, and Boaz. Right. Now, the symbols of the initiatory degree are the sheaf, sickle, and hourglass. The second degree, or Ruth degree, appears to be a rite for women. It drew from the book of Ruth in the Old Testament, of course. And the dramatic degree ritual required the candidate to be hoodwinked. Does that sound familiar? In part, this degree also pointed to Ruth, Naomi, and Boaz. However, other items were also included. The outsider figure played by the candidate for admission is a Moabitish stranger. If you recall, Ruth was from Moab. The Gleaners ritual employed a large amount of religious symbolism. For instance, the room where the Gleaners met had an altar in its center. Prayers were spoken and hymns were sung. The ritual also contained an initiation format and funeral ceremony. The rituals also included prayers, hymns, but omitted any explicit reference to Christianity or Jesus Christ. And the symbols drew from an obvious source. The emblems of the first degree were sheaf, sickle, and hourglass, as I mentioned, and the Gleaners worked a 2-tier organizational model. Local lodges were called arbors. Each arbor had a set of officers: the chief gleaner, vice gleaner, secretary, treasurer, chaplain, conductor, conductress, lecturer, and guard. The last 5 officers had ritual duties. The Gleaners held a very strong belief in family values. Its emblem showed an ideal family of father, mother, son, and daughter, with the parent holding stalks of grain across which are the words Prudence Future. I hope I said that right, which might be translated as thought of tomorrow, thought for tomorrow. Over time, the organization began to concentrate on the insurance aspect of the order and changed their name to Gleaner Life Insurance Policy. In 1969, the Gleaners had 55,000 members. By 1979, their numbers had declined to 47,000 members. The Gleaners had 43,000 members in 1994, and as of today, the group claims roughly 74,000 members. The second organization that we'll be investigating today is the Order of the Heptasophs. I hope I said that properly. The Order of the Heptasophs was a fraternal organization established in New Orleans, Louisiana in 1852 by Alexander Leonard Saunders, and early members included ex-governors, ex-mayors, so many different high-moving members of society at the time. And the name is derived from Greek roots meaning 7 and wise, or the 7 wise men. This should be interesting. The Order of Heptasophs was originally called the 7 Wise Men, and may have been formed by graduates of the earlier Mystical Seven or Rainbow Society that were popular in college fraternities in the U.S. South during the period of their creation. Some historians have noted that at least a strong similarity in the rituals and nomenclature with those college fraternities. Now, its American founder, Alexander Leonard Saunders, reportedly was a Freemason. Now, like most other orders, the Order of Heptasophs members love to claim that the organization's real origin went back to the Magi of the East mentioned in the Christmas story. Does that sound familiar? Right? Some accounts even tried to trace the society's history back to 1104 BC, linking it to Zoroaster, who reportedly was the head of the Persian Magi. Now, what is known is that after being introduced in New Orleans in 1852, a Grand Conclave of Louisiana was set up in June of that year and incorporated in 1854. The Supreme Conclave of the organization, embracing several states, was organized in 1857 and had its communication or convention that year. Membership was open to white males over 18 who were of good moral character, and like so many fraternal orders, the Order of the Heptasophs required that prospective members profess belief in the Supreme Being. This was consistent with the belief in the society's motto that of "In God we trust." The emblem of the Heptasophs was a 7-pointed star, which portrayed a 7-branched candlestick, all-seeing eye, altar and ark, plus a motto, "In God we trust." Now, the Heptasophs worked a 4-degree structure. Their rituals were ornate and elaborate, and they resembled the Masonic rituals in a number of ways. Not surprising. Like I told you, their founder was a Freemason. The initiatory degree had told the story of, the Persian pseudo history that I talked about earlier. And the 3 further degrees illustrated the need to be flexible while pursuing the course of one's duties. I can only just imagine what they were doing to those candidates during those kinds of those types of rituals. Of course, if you know anything about these esoteric type organizations, you will see that. Now, in order to satisfy modern demand for a military feature, an optional uniformed rank was also introduced. So that's interesting. It just seems to be something in a lot of these organizations from that time. A life insurance branch named the endowment rank was established in 1880 and was open to members in good standing who passed a medical exam. Early growth of the Heptasophs was largely in the southern states, and as a result, it lost many of its members as well as most of its influence during the American Civil War. Prior to the Civil War, the order had made little effort to extend into other areas of the British colonies or into the northern states. However, in the post-Civil War period, the group began to grow again, and during the early 1870s, they experienced rapid growth in membership and reached a peak of 4,000 members. The Depression of the 1870s, and you heard me talk about this before, this particular period, checked the growth of the Heptasophs and led to a movement for general death benefits. Local conclaves were allowed to create a benefit option, but there was no overall benefits. A disagreement over benefits led to the creation of what later became known as the Improved Order of Heptasophs. There was an intense rivalry between the old and the new order for a number of years, but this died down after the original order adopted its own benefit plan in 1880. During the 1870s, this is interesting, the order became very popular among German Americans and was said to have spread to Germany in 1877. That's interesting, isn't it? In 1892, the order was open to both men and women with formation of female courts. In 1917, the Order of the Heptasophs merged with or shall we say the improved Order of the Heptasophs merged with the Fraternal Aid Union. Then the Fraternal Aid Union changed its name to the Standard Life Association in 1933. The Standard Life Association eventually became Standard Mutual Life, a mutual company, in 1968. You look at some of these life insurance companies and benefit societies today, and you wonder where they got their origins. Quite interesting, isn't it? Well, brothers and sisters, what did we learn? I love studying fraternal history. And one of the things we're learning is that, as I've often said, Freemasons and other fraternal organizations had their grips on their passwords to protect their secrets and to keep people from copying it. But many of their members went out and formed fraternal organizations of their own and essentially copied a lot of what they'd learned in their lodge. Now, if you see here, in the case of the Gleaners, members were voted on by a blackball ballot. Does that sound familiar? Right? To those of you in Freemasonry, the dramatic degree required a candidate to be hoodwinked. Well, there you have it, kind of, you know what I mean? Like, there is, it sounds familiar. And of course, as you heard me say, the Heptasophs founder, Alexander Leonard Saunders, was reportedly a Freemason. So, Freemasons were having quite a bit of influence within fraternalism at the time and probably still do. The early growth of the Heptasophs, moving on, was largely in the southern states, and it lost many of its members, as well as most of its influence during the American Civil War. It's, because they had made little effort to extend into other areas of the British colonies, namely Canada, or into the northern states. You can't keep something like fraternalism local, really, for it to grow and to maintain its growth and not to die out. It has to extend, it has to grow into different areas, right? And of course, as you've heard me say, the Depression of the mid-1870s checked the growth of the Heptasophs. And you've heard me talk about this before. Everybody remembers how bad the Great Depression of the 1930s was. They teach that in school, but something like that, of that magnitude, and a lot of economists will tell you that they call the economic downturn of the 1870s a Great Depression, because that's really what it was. And you can imagine how catastrophic it would have been with no welfare state or anything like that to help people out, right? The other thing is the 1870s, the Heptasophs became popular among German Americans and eventually rumored to have spread to Germany. I'd love to see anybody, brothers and sisters, if you know of it, whether it's still active in any way, shape, or form over there, I'd love to hear about that. And of course, both of these, Gleaner Life Insurance, the Gleaners became Gleaner Life Insurance, and of course, the Heptasophs eventually evolved into life insurance, eventually became, eventually the insurance company that they became part of eventually evolved into Standard Mutual, Life, which is a mutual company, in 1968. So you look around you, as I said, these organizations in many ways are still having an impact today. Nothing is like exactly as you see it per se. These organizations, like I said, became something and exist today in one form or another, right? So they did have an impact and continue, shall we say, in many ways to have an impact. And I think that is one thing, how is your organization? What impact do you see it having in the coming years, or what impact is it having today? I'd welcome, any discussion on that. Right. I hope you enjoy this. Like I said, I love studying fraternal history. I did think it was important this year to study more of it because, as I said, to go forward, we have to remember our past. That's all we're going to do for today, brothers and sisters. Before I go, I want to remind you that this podcast is available on both YouTube and Spreaker. Please share, like, and subscribe when viewing Points of Light Radio on YouTube. I also welcome your comments and input. You can follow Points of Light Radio on my Facebook page at facebook.com/Points of Light Radio. My Twitter handle is at PO Light Radio. You can see the link to my Spotify channel as well as my Points of Light Radio store. Brothers and sisters, until we meet again, just step into the light.